You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلمين هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Champione, ole, ole, ole. Hey, Lewis, how you doing? Luis Hernandez, Cosmos Country, pardon me. He is, of course, the Champione. Cosmos won the NASL Soccer Bowl last week. Lewis, how you doing?
Doing great. Listening to that opening, the golazo, and this game, right to penalties, nothing like that, 0-0 scoreline, no golazo until the end. So, but still just great to walk away with back-to-back championships.
Fair enough, and it wasn't the smaller venue as we talked about before. Let's start there. What was it like to watch the game on a rooftop? Once the game started, did you forget where you were and just enjoy what was on the pitch? I had the advantage of having been at Belson a bunch of times for Open Cup, for a recent Puerto Rico FC exhibition match, and now this. And, you walk in, it's surprising. I came in with a bunch of visitors from around the NASL, and you could see that they were clearly kind of surprised by the layout of the place. But, once the game started, all the focus shifted to the game. You just kind of forget you're on a rooftop. It is kind of weird when you look off and you see cranes on the other side, elevated, holding cameras up from, below where you can see. But really, at that point, the focus just went to the game. Fair enough. And let's talk about the game in a general sense. Of course, it did go 0-0, 2 penalties. Was it a typical 0-0 game for those that didn't watch, or was there more to it than just that?
The scoreline was 0-0, but there definitely were a number of great opportunities for both sides. I think, honestly, it was most of our listeners were chiming in and telling us they thought that Indy had the better of the two, the better performance of the two. I'm inclined to agree. They had some better chances. Don Smart hits a crossbar twice. Ayman Zayed forces a save from Jimmy Maurer in the 11th minute, which was more of an instinct save rather than anything. Indy definitely looked very, very dangerous throughout. Cosmos had a few chances. I don't think they made the most of them.
Louis, when you're looking at the game and the penalty and the whole situation, were you surprised by the defensive nature of this game? Yes, usually championship matches are defensive, but to go to penalties on a 0-0 situation, were you surprised by that?
Not really. Coach Gio Savarese from the Cosmos, he recently put it in post game how he felt the game reflected the nature of the season. And I think by that he meant, finding solutions out of adversity. And in this case, it was the lack of certain players that they didn't have due to injury or international duty. But in a sense, the performance of the game really reflected the Cosmos season in itself. The Cosmos, aside from, an occasional, there was one game where they had a 6-1 win, another 3-0. But in most cases, if they're winning, they were really just gritting them out, just kind of grinding out wins. And it's, you force the win, and maybe it's not so pretty or anything, but that was the Cosmos season all year. This was not the year of Raul where they're coming in and they're expected to be the class of the league. They held it scoreless for 120 minutes, and then they forced the win in penalties. And that's really it. It wasn't a pretty win, but it was a win.
Were you surprised by the level of Indy 11? Because, yes, it was the second best team this season, but the Cosmos had a favorite heading into the Soccer Bowl. Were you surprised by Indy 11, the way they pushed the Cosmos and had a chance up until the penalties?
Not at all. Indy is, this season in particular, Indy has been absolutely phenomenal. We have not been able to beat them in Indy. However, they have not been able to beat us here. And that really, in my mind, was the only reason we were the outright favorites, because we were playing at home. Indy built a great organization this year. Strong goalkeeping from John Bush, who joined. They've made some very good pickups from last year's Ottawa Fury finalist team. Ayman Zayed was, in my opinion, a big surprise. I didn't expect him to have the year he had, but once he started rolling, I didn't expect him to, I expected him to have a solid game. No, I expected Indy to come in and give us a battle. I did not expect it to be in any way the Cosmos rolling over the competition.
Louis, we're in the middle of not to bring up the dreaded MLS in an NASL interview, but we are in the middle of MLS playoff season right now, which just have a long period of time, which creates some momentum around that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the structure of NASL playoffs and whether or not they've struck the right balance between traditional methods of determining a champion and sort of North American playoff methods where you're allowed to get enough attention, enough momentum going for this league, and a league that kind of needs the attention right now. Do you think that the format's right?
I like the playoff structure, the way that they have it currently. I like the idea that it's a spring and a fall champion, and then two other teams can come in and just kind of screw it up in the end, which is how playoffs work. It's not just the guy who walks away with most points at the end of the season. You can have the underdog, can have an 8 seed come in and screw things up. What I have not necessarily liked is the unbalanced structure, the very light spring versus the very heavy fall season. I think maybe I felt Indy was appropriate. Even as a spring champion, I felt Indy was appropriate for being in the playoffs based on the season they've had. But the playoff structure itself, I think it's great. You have 4 teams, you have 2 rounds. We're not a very big league, and as you know, the league's going to be getting smaller next season. I think it is appropriate for what it's been. I don't know if that format can continue next season.
All right, let's turn our attention to what it was like in the stands for you during that penalty shootout. Personally, just set the scene, paint the picture for us. What was the intensity in that stadium like? What was it like to watch a penalty shootout with your team, the team that you sweat for, that you bleed for? 5 shots away from a championship. What's that like, Louis?
Well, I was up in the press box for the whole of regulation and extra time. When we knew they were going to penalties, I ran downstairs with a few others and took it in from that side of the pitch, and yeah, it was pretty intense. You have most of the stadium standing at that point. It's no longer just the supporters. You have fans behind me standing in their seats trying to get a better view. 5 Points is going nuts because they're taking the penalties right in front of the 5 Points Cosmo supporters section. And on the other side of the stadium, you have the Brickyard Battalion, and they're making their noise too. It was tense. It was, not even just, I don't think it was even just being a Cosmo supporter. We had a lot of neutral journalists there, and it's just very, very tense moment to see how it's going to play out. Indy scores first, Cosmos answer. Indy misses their second, Cosmos score. Now there's, a clear sense of hope coming from most around the stadium. Indy steps up, blows a third one, sends that into space, and at that point, it felt, you could feel the tension ease. It felt to a degree, and this is for no disrespect to the Indy supporters at all, it felt like the championship was essentially won, was pretty much on the verge. Cosmos convert the next one. Indy, Nemanja Vukovic, credit to him, down a hole. He comes in, does his job, and Ryan Richter, an Ottawa Fury member from last year's team that lost in the final, is the one to slot the winner. There was some great storylines and just some great narratives. Phenomenal atmosphere. I have to give absolute credit to both sets of supporter groups. We could hear them up in the press box. 5 Points doing their thing. Brickyard Battalion doing their thing. Great atmosphere. And maybe for the sake of it being such an intimate stadium, such a small stadium, it worked perfectly.
I want to move the conversation for a second, Luis, to Gio Savarese. He was touted as maybe a potential hire for Minnesota United and MLS, but according to many different sources, Adrian Heath, former coach of the Orlando City SC, will be the coach of Minnesota. Are you surprised by that signing, and are you kind of glad that maybe Gio will be back with the Cosmos next
year? I'm happy we haven't lost Gio yet. However, if you ask anybody at This Is Cosmos Country, for the most part, we're all convinced he's gone after the season. In a recent article from Empire Soccer, there were sources indicating the Cosmos would not stand in his way. It came to light later on that apparently the Cosmos asked for a transfer fee or a buyout or something with a year remaining on his contract. There's been some mixed reaction to this. Some people think it's very classless. Some people think that there's nothing wrong with it. In my heart, I feel like Gio should, if he wanted to, be able to walk off and into the sunset. He's given his team 3 titles in 4 years on a declining budget, and I feel like he should be able to do that. In a business sense, I realize, the Cosmos are trying to be a global club. You can't just let your best asset walk away with a year left. It sets a bad precedent. And even when Gio has, and this is something that comes up, Gio has constantly let players walk away if they feel that they want to better their careers somewhere else. Hunter Gorski left earlier this year. Hunter Freeman went down to Miami. Walter Restrepo last year going to Philly Union. But the thing is, they've never just walked away for free. The Walter Restrepo deal, we got a loan back. Hunter Freeman, we got a transfer fee for. So I don't feel it's inappropriate what's going on. It does have a bad feeling to it in a way, but I don't think it's inappropriate. I do think there's a very, very solid chance Gio will not be back next year.
And where would you see him if it's not with Minnesota?
That's the question. There's from what we understand, there's plenty of MLS teams that have been looking for him outside of Minnesota, like you mentioned, and we hear that there may be overseas interest in him, and all of it's still pretty unclear. But I mean, the thing is, Gio's built a winner, and he's built it out of multiple pieces. Players come and go from the Cosmos constantly, and he still manages to put together a team that can at least make the playoffs, and in 3 or 4 years win it. And especially with, if you're coming into a team that's had a bad year in MLS, Gio's the kind of guy who's going to eyeball targets and really be able to just put a team together that can actually compete. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think that he'll be gone.
Lewis, let's turn our attention to the offseason now. Not so much what the Cosmos are going to sign and how they're going to approach it in ways like that, but just literally what happens in the next few months with the Cosmos? Do they mothball for a few months? Do they try and get back and do touring? How do they stay visible in that market, in that crowded market, in the world market, even in the next few months in the offseason with the uncertainty around the NASL?
Well, you nailed it with the uncertainty. It's been 4 days. We're entering the 5th day after a championship, and we already know there's going to be about 9. Well, we think there's going to be about 9 clubs remaining in the NASL, and of those 9 clubs, we know where 8 of them will be playing next season, and the only club that we don't know where their home field will be next year are the NASL champions, and that's last we heard they were talking to MCU Park. They were looking at new venues because they're not intending to play at Hofstra next season. But at this point, we still have nothing. There's been no season ticket overtures made to anyone. The lack of a stadium, the uncertainty of Gio Savarese staying. We hear, certain players might be leaving. I expect the Cosmos to resign a bunch of them. But I can't see maybe a player like Juan Arango wanting to stay after he's won a title already, and if Gio leaves. There's so much uncertainty. Last year, when you mentioned touring, the Cosmos, they went up the West Coast. They did a preseason tour there against a few MLS, PDL clubs. But last year was the first year the Cosmos didn't go anywhere. Usually, we've seen them go to England, Saudi. We've seen them go to the UAE. We've seen them go to Hong Kong, El Salvador. And last year, they stayed 100% in the United States. Their only international friendly being against SD Eibar in Vegas. This club has felt like it's been, kind of cutting their costs for some time now. I don't know if I see that changing anytime soon. It definitely doesn't feel like it. And I feel like if they were going to change their ways or really blow out this offseason, we would have heard something already.
How important is geography in selecting that stadium venue for next year? Do they need to stay in the same part of the city, do you think?
Well, you asked about staying in the same part of the city. Last year, they weren't even in the city. This year, they were in Long Island. And they're in a part of Long Island where, it's not exactly the easiest to reach. You have to take, if you're coming from the city, you have to take whatever public transportation you take to the Long Island Railroad. From the Long Island Railroad, you may or may not have to transfer in Jamaica, get to Mineola, hop onto a school bus, ride out to the Cosmos Stadium. It's not an easy ride. It's expensive one to do. Round trip on a weekend is going to ring you $16 per person. That's if it's only one person. If you're bringing a family, that's a whole other ball game. they need to move into at least a closer location. And I mean, I don't believe Brooklyn is the end all of solutions here, at least not that part of Brooklyn, Coney Island, MCU Park. But at least for the time being, they'd be off a subway, multiple subway lines, multiple bus lines, with all sorts of attractions around. You can turn that into a destination for at least several months of the year, most of the NASL calendar. I think that for next season, they need to move to Brooklyn in order to have a chance to kind of stay semi-relevant, to kind of bounce back, have a little reboot, if you would. But that's the thing. We've heard nothing so far. Hopefully we'll hear something soon. Lots of question marks right now.
Fair enough, Lisa. And just last quick question before we say goodbye. For you personally, do you have another team? What do you do in the offseason now? You focus on Europe, or do you just hibernate for a little while?
I have a few other teams. The first soccer team I ever watched play live here in New York was Manchester United. Ended up staying as a fan of theirs. I am Costa Rican by birth. I identify with Saprissa in Costa Rica. And, I'll be watching the U.S. men's national team continue to, hopefully not continue to make history in a bad way. So we'll see.
All right. So you're a little torn last week, were you?
Oh, the U.S. failed me in so many ways last week, and I won't go into all of them. But the U.S. soccer team in particular, that I guess they didn't read the plot about the Dos a Cero or something. They must have missed that.
All right, fair enough, Lewis. We'll talk in the offseason, hopefully. Thanks again for all your time lately, and enjoy your championship.
Take care, guys.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Kevin, if Lewis and Andrew for Indy were more of the voices that we heard of attached to the NASL on the fan side, I think less people would be resistant to the NASL, as opposed to some of the voices that do get a lot of time down there. If you follow, thanks, Lewis, again.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it'll be interesting, the offseason in the NASL. Congratulations to the New York Cosmos once again.
All right, going to do a bit of a split block here, but Kevin, first you had a little bit of news you wanted to promote. You'll be out and about tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 12:30, I will be at Soccer 5 in Montreal on the St. Catharines, 3,900 something on St. Catharines. I will be there for the Procure, for the COF Football Club Procure Soccer Tournament. A 5-on-5 will be there with notables from RDS, TVA Sport, and a lot of other soccer personalities, and yours truly will be part of that game. So if you want to have a good laugh, come see me play soccer tomorrow. I guarantee it will be worth your while.
All right, fair enough. You keeper, you playing goal?
No, it's I don't think there's goalkeepers. It's like a cage, kind of like soccer. So it's smaller goals. So I'm gonna have to play somewhere that is not in the goal. So please, someone help me.
All right, I'll be playing tomorrow too, but it won't be for charity. All right, Kevin, let's continue our debate about the relative merits of the greatest city in the world, or Montreal. Sorry, I do that joke every day.
I wanted to talk about the restaurant scene because, well, if you're looking at the Toronto scene over the last few years, it has regenerated. But look at what it came up with. All chains or inspired by Montreal restaurant. If you talk about Smokes Poutineery, Three Brewers, all those type of places, well, they're all from here first.
Well, yeah, there certainly are a lot of those, but I don't know if are you leaving the tourist areas, Kevin?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, there's more than that here. Right now, fusion is big in the city. There's a lot of tacos which are inspired from elsewhere. Toronto is a melting pot, as we all know, right? So it obviously has a lot of inspiration on its restaurant scenes from all over the world, and a lot of fusion from all over the world. There's a great little Thai Mexican place, if that makes any sense to you, that's in my neighborhood.
But yeah.
So exactly, but you're talking to someone when you're having a debate about restaurants that I tend to go to, the Firkin restaurants, which are, pubs, and there's also the Taco Bells of the world, Taco Bells,
the Tim Hortons. There's a lot of those.
Yeah, I don't.
I've never seen as many Tim Hortons as downtown Toronto. There's more Tim Horton than Starbucks. That's like impossible.
Well, I'll tell you what the funny thing about that is that if you go back 10 years ago, you couldn't find a Tim Hortons in Toronto. They were all coffee times. And coffee times are coffee time is a brilliant representation of the old Toronto, because coffee time has a certain reputation here that isn't necessarily pleasant. And if you're from Toronto, you'll know what I had to go to a coffee time. You know what that means, and stale donuts and crack in the back basically is what it means. So no, look, I can't say as I can comment enough on the Montreal restaurant scene, but I do know that there are a lot of great little holes in the walls here. There's some spectacular Indian food here. I live close to the Indian Bazaar, just down the street on Girard for me. I can bike there in about 20 minutes. $10 and you can be full to the gourd and with a brilliant, flavorful food from all over the world. That is what makes Toronto's cuisine scene so wonderful and beautiful. There's just so many choice.
Oh yeah, but I remember walking in old Toronto and going to a French restaurant. Oh wait, that doesn't exist. It's the old Montreal. That's the kind of experience that you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, but it's I'm sure that the Montreal French cuisine is almost as good as Quebec City's, I'm sure. But
let's not talk about Quebec City here. It's not relevant to this conversation.
All right. I do think I like Mexican and I like Indian and I like just plain old I guess American or Canadian burgers and stuff like that, and I have plenty of choice that way. The Indian stuff is spectacular. As I said, there's some great Ethiopian restaurants here. There's a lot of choice here because of the massive multiculturalism of the city. And Montreal has similar,
and there's a lot of Montreal restaurants in Toronto. The other way, it's not the case. I don't know of one Toronto chain that stays in Montreal, or a restaurant, or it's chef from Montreal that goes to Toronto. It's not chef from Toronto that goes to Montreal.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's the cuisine, like the best cooking schools, chef schools are the one in Stratford is very good, and that's an Ontario one, and a lot of them would serve Ontario. I think maybe that if you want to get into a cuisine, you need more foodies on here to have a true debate. Again, my taste buds run a little more standard than maybe most, although as I said, I do like my Indian food occasionally, and there's some brilliant choices down here, but alas, Kevin, let's let the decide. I think this would be a good one. I'll go to you recommend a restaurant in Montreal on Tuesday, and if I have time that isn't the friggin' Peel Pub, because I'm not eating at the Peel Pub.
Don't, because that'll be maybe potentially your last meal. Don't do that.
Exactly. So we have lots of those choices too. If I won't eat it, I tell you, don't eat at the Duke of Gloucester. That's a no-go there as well. So
99, the same thing.
99. Oh my God. I got sick the last time I was at 99. I was at the World. The last time I was at 99 I had like bottled beer and I still got sick.
It changed from then. Like it got renovated, new owners, and the ultras are more a part of the scene there too, with murals and a nice decoration, a nice atmosphere in that bar. But what it used to be was, yes, don't eat there. But things have changed.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know the next time I'll be in Montreal as a neutral, because it won't be obviously the CCL in the spring, and I won't be a neutral on Tuesday. So I'm probably not going to walk in there on Tuesday. That probably doesn't seem like the safest thing I've ever done. But I'll have to check it out at some point, because 99 with the World Cup, which was the last time I was there, was charming. We'll call it charming. Down market charming. We'll call it.
True. But just to finish the segment, Duane. It's called Montreal Steak Spice. It's called Montreal Smoked Meat, and Montreal Bagels.
All right. Well, yeah, sure. All right. The bagels are pretty good. I'll give you that. There's no doubt about that. And the smoked meats, it's not really my thing, but I know a lot of people will go out of their way to go there. And there's a couple restaurants in Montreal that a lot of the Toronto fans will grab the Uber or the taxi and go to the far east side to go to a few smoked meats places. I know. At any rate, there's some good food here, though, too, if you want. As I said, I recommend the Indian. All right, let's move past this, though. We have a couple quick little notes on expansion that came out. And look, today I was joking to Kevin off air. All week it's been a bit of a struggle to fill an hour. It's been a slow news week because it was an international week, and international weeks are always tough to fill. International week break ends, and all of a sudden I have more news than I know what to do with. So normally, and we probably might revisit this in more detail next week, but there's a couple expansion stuff out there today that's of great interest. I think the first one I'll talk about is that yesterday, Sacramento, they have finally fully approved that stadium deal. that should put them in line for one of the 24 spots that they've claimed that they're going to. Now, I think at this point in time, we all understand they're going beyond 24. That is, they're probably going to go to 28. I think they're going to go to 32 eventually, because as long as there's money and there's markets out there where they can expand it and help their TV footprint, Don Garber is going to take those checks and cash them. People criticize that, say that they're expanding too quickly. It's a debate that's worthwhile having. I think the level of expansion has put a strain on the American player pool, but hey, I understand the finances behind it as well. The other story, Kevin, and I think we've talked about Sacramento a lot, so we'll put them aside for a second and talk about this other one in more detail right now. And that's today. There's an announcement in St. Louis that they have an ownership group, and they're going to go all in on getting an expansion team to St. Louis. Kevin,
the term is sweeping plans for MLS expansion. So that means that they're going all out, but then there's rendering of the stadium in the article as well that you can find on MLSsoccer.com. Just the source of it too mentioned probably tells that there's a lot of positive vibe within the MLS towards St. Louis as well. So it'll be interesting. Beautiful stadium rendering, but it's just first rendering talks. But it's a sweeping plan to expand in St. Louis, and it would serve a part of the country that is not served by Major League Soccer as well as other parts.
Yeah. Well, he's long said that that's the next area of the country that he wants to sort of fill out, that he wants to, put the dots in there. And that's why Cincinnati has suddenly got themselves on the radar as well, that kind of middle America flyover part of the country. The thing about St. Louis is it's been a dream for a long time. For most people in American soccer, it is the original home of American soccer, the hotbed of American soccer. If you look back in the early days, like we're talking like the early part of the last century, St. Louis was the area of the country where soccer was probably the most popular. So they've long believed that they wanted to get a team in there. In fact, if you go all the way back to the launching of Major League Soccer in 1994 or 95, when they were planning this league, St. Louis was always the targeted market for kind of middle America. They ended up going to Kansas City because basically they couldn't get an ownership group together that would put a team in there.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
Interesting comment by one of our listeners, Nick Anon on Twitter at NickAnon1. 30 team is ideal. Five divisions of 6, play every team once except your division. You play twice for 34 games. It does bring to a more quote unquote balanced type of schedule. Maybe that's the ideal solution, or a solution going forward as well. Once every possible team, the Sacramento, St. Louis, and others maybe do join MLS.
Yeah, I mean, the other extreme side of that, I understand what you're saying, Nick. The other extreme side is 40 with two divisions, with two conferences that don't play each other. So you have MLS West and MLS East, and there's no crossover, or maybe very limited crossover like you see. Well, Major League Baseball is getting ridiculous with it, but that kind of idea that you have some interleague play, but most of they're divided. So I'd call it an MLB method, the 20 and 20. I think that is something that I would be hard pressed to believe that hasn't at least been bantied about within MLS circles, because there are 40 markets out there that you could probably get in if you could find owners. So that's another possibility. To get back to St. Louis, the problem there has always been ownership. And if you remember, many people probably don't remember the early days of MLS, but a lot of people probably do remember the expansion bid that ultimately led to Portland and Vancouver joining the league. And St. Louis was a big part of that. And in fact, in many people's minds, they were the favorites to get that spot back then. And it was quite a surprise that they went to two teams in the Northwest to fill out the league at that point. That came as an underdog. Portland was, I think, seen as a very long shot at the beginning of that expansion process. Vancouver less so, because I think they wanted a Western presence in Canada. The problem back then was that the owner, Jeff Cooper, and that's a name that used to be talked about a lot. Had we been running the show back then, Jeff Cooper would have been a topic we talked about every week. It turns out that there was no there with Jeff Cooper. The man didn't have any money. He pretended he had money. He was a bit of a snake oil salesman, and it ultimately fell through. He bought a women's team that he didn't even get through one season with before he ran out of cash. So MLS dodged a bullet with that, and I think their due diligence basically allowed them to see that they were that he was a bullet, right? Now that they have this ownership group, I have a hunch that St. Louis is going to get fast-tracked. that they will be a market that MLS is willing to allow to play in temporary stadiums because the market's big enough, because the market size matters. And then this is where we can flip it to Sacramento. Sacramento is a market where they can't get away with that, where they're willing to have Sacramento come in if Sacramento can check every single box. Whereas I think with St. Louis, they're going to allow them to check most of the boxes and let them come in, Kevin.
So you're saying that they would be kind of like an NYCFC situation for St. Louis and kind of like a Columbus situation for Sacramento.
Yeah, precisely. That they will probably, I suspect that they will end up coming in playing in that big old football stadium that's laying there empty right now until they get an actual stadium built. And that would probably be the model that they use, and MLS would be perfectly happy with that. And I'll tell you another market that they're going to be happy to do that with is Detroit. If Detroit can find an owner, Detroit's going to be in within a couple of years. And I think St. Louis is the same way. I would even almost be willing to bet St. Louis makes it in before Sacramento. We'll see.
But it's interesting that you mentioned the empty football stadium, because let's face it, it's a wound that's really open right now for St. Louis. They lost their football team and with the NFL team. And then when you're looking at the partners, the ownership group behind what St. Louis FC or whatever that rendering could be, it is interesting because you do become, outside of the Blues and the Cards, you become
Cardinals, yeah.
Cardinals, yeah. You become a big major market team in that league, so it will be very interesting.
Yeah. All right. That's as I said, I think that both Sacramento and St. Louis are topics that deserve blocks of their own, and or maybe even half shows of their own, interviews of their own. We'll look to do that in the weeks ahead, in the next week, maybe, or the weeks ahead of after that. But in the meantime, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about that Guardian article that everyone else is talking about.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Woo! Thank you, Grant.
Oh yeah, it's Friday. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you, Grant. It's also, sorry, I'm going to speak in rest of the world. These American listeners, it's 17 degrees Celsius here in Toronto today. It is November 18th, and it is 17 degrees Celsius.
It's going to be the same here tomorrow, so we're going to get what you have today tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not going to snow before Tuesday, is it, in Montreal? Because the weather can switch that quickly.
I don't think it will be, but maybe next week. It's not in Colorado, though, like yesterday.
Yeah, we don't need snow on top of that roof. Well, how many inches does it have to be before they have to postpone the game, Kevin?
I think it's like 4, maybe between 2 and 4. I couldn't recall, but yeah, there is a limit. Yeah, let's just not talk about it, so we're gonna jinx it. But yeah, there is a. We talked about this before the CCL final, that there is a point where they can't play a game in Big O because the snow on the quote unquote roof. Quote unquote roof. Yeah, if you actually have seen picture of what the roof looks, the roof of the I don't know how you call it, but la toile, that, you know, if you have
like a tent,
yeah,
put like a tent over the top.
Well, you wouldn't sleep in that tent if you seen picture of close to what it looked like. There's duct tape everywhere. There's strands of it. It's broken, ripped, and fixed some part. Yeah, I do love that stadium. Brings a lot of memories for me, but I'm exaggerating, of course. But it's always in the back of my mind still. But I am willing to go in there.
I like the Big O as well. I've been there many times in my life, but that place it's charming. It's down market charming, to use a term that I use.
It's charming in the old house type of way, that it's unfixable, it's crooked, it's sinking, it's not going to be there 100 years from now. but you still like the place.
Well, it might be. Yeah, I told it real quickly. When I was at the CCL final, I walked to the very top of the stadium, and there's windowsills around there, right? So you can see out. I looked at this one windowsill, and not a word of a lie, there was a crunched up and rusting can of OV beer that was sitting there that I swear to God saw the opening ceremonies for the 1976 Olympics. That beer can did. At any rate, that's the big O for you.
OV hasn't been sold in Quebec in what, 20 years?
Yeah, precise. I don't think OV's been sold anywhere in 20 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
It conveys an image of 1970s Canada in a way that if you're not Canadian, you won't get. But at any rate, there you go. We're really losing the plot here today. We're all over the place because Grant's in the town. At any rate,
yeah, but there's a Guardian article that's it's not necessarily some comparison to our. Well, let's put it this way, our a little bit of a stretch, but it does bring up a good point. That's accountability to it.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was talking to the author yesterday. It was in The Guardian. He's a guy that splits time between the United States and other parts of the world, Australia, I think. I'm not too sure whether he's American or not. The error that he made in this article, if you've read it, and many people have, was that he kind of compared a U8 House League team and the fact that they all get participation trophies with failure at the elite level. And there is no connection between a U8 rec team and failure at the elite level. I mean, there just isn't. It's a ridiculous way to start an article, and he kind of lost everyone with that anecdotal lead that he put there. So, but putting that aside, though, yeah, there is a debate to be had about U.S. soccer and whether it's accountable enough. People at the top are accountable enough, whether they demand enough success there, whether it's mediocre. And that's the title of it is U.S. soccer is mediocre at every level. Kevin, I think that when we're seeing the Klinsmann conversation this week is why this is triggering to a lot of people is that there are, as I said on the show that the day after, there are not many countries in the world in which Jurgen Klinsmann would still be employed. And in fact, I don't think there's any that are regular World Cup appearers. So it begs the question, is there accountability within U.S. soccer? And I don't know. I'll get your opinion first before I jump in with mine, Kevin.
What would happen if the Mexican national team lost 4-0 to Costa Rica? Maybe it's a little extreme. They'll fire their coach, obviously. Maybe that's extreme.
They'll fire their coach because he sneezed or something too. But yes, yeah, you're right.
That's extreme. But to the other side, do you really give a vote of confidence after a 4-0 defeat? It was a disguised vote of confidence by Sunil Gulati saying, let's wait and see how it unfolds. Well, we've been kind of waiting and seeing how it unfolds for the last few cycles. And yeah, result in tournament does hide deficiencies that this selection might have. But now, looking to the future, will the next tournament still hide the deficiencies? Or is the Soccer Federation willing to take that gamble once again? It's interesting now because the rise of CONCACAF is for real. Costa Rica, top 4 team in the world if you're looking at the last year's World Cup. That's what's fascinating to me is, look, you do have some incline of this team being on a decline. So do you act or do you just wait and it's too long? Like when you're in a sinking plane, do you wait to jump out to open your parachute or you open the parachute as soon as you can?
Yeah. Look, this is what it comes down to. And I understand, I think, why there is a defensive reaction to this gentleman who's an outsider to the soccer community, sort of saying that the soccer community doesn't hold in the U.S. doesn't hold people accountable enough because the people he's essentially talking to do, in fact, hold these people accountable, right? And that's where this disconnect happens. You know, someone screaming, "Oh, there's no criticism out there," ignores the fact that how many publications did we say yesterday called for him to be fired? All but one is the answer, and it
pretty
was
much
like a list of like 11, right? So this idea that no one's trying to hold Klinsmann accountable is absurd. It just doesn't stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever. Lots of people are trying to hold him accountable. The problem is that the critical mass is not there. That we don't have. You know, that's the space. Men in Blazers aren't calling for his head. And if Men in Blazers call for his head, then maybe we've reached that sort of level where the pressure is true because
I was going to say, Duane, there's no open lines on Mancow or on Colin Cowherd asking for Jurgen Klinsmann's head. That level of outcry, basically, from the fan base, it'll probably never happen. And that's maybe why they're able to just keep Klinsmann there without having a big fanfare behind it.
Yeah, there's those of us in the bubble, I mean, we're in Canada, so we don't really care, but we're in the bubble. We're in the American soccer bubble, so we understand the issues and we understand the need for him to go, probably. But by and large, those in the American soccer bubble are screaming for him to go, but the walls are too thick. The outside of the bubble isn't hearing it. And in order for a critical mass to happen, to create true pressure, which could cause true change, because I think that ultimately Sunil would be in trouble too if there was a critical mass there too, because that's to me where the buck ultimately falls, right? Like that's the failure, is the hiring of this guy with no evidence based whatsoever, because Tim Howard stood in his head against Belgium. He gets another 4 years, like at an outrageous amount of money that's causing problems across the platform, including the dispute with the women when you look at the salary discrepancies there. And this is all fallen at the very top, and there's no pressure there because the pressure doesn't exist outside the bubble, and the bubble isn't big enough yet that it's going to reach mainstream call-in radio, as you said. And then that's just the bottom line. If this was the U.S. men's basketball team at the Olympics failing to get a gold medal, you can guarantee that, although it's not quite apples to apples because they don't run a consistent program, but you'd guarantee that whoever was coaching that team wouldn't be getting a second chance, right? It would just be understood. Yeah. If they tried to give him a second chance, all hell would break loose on talk radio. But because the general sports audience, even though soccer is growing, still doesn't consistently talk or think about soccer, you're not going to get that kind of pressure. But to then turn around and basically write an article that's only going to be read by those that are criticizing him and saying that no one's criticizing him, well, that's the wrong approach if you want to start that dialogue, in my opinion.
He's right, though, in a way that if you take it not as the bubble talk, but in mainstream, he does have a point, though, because there's no Mancow calling for him, Colin Cowherd, Dan Patrick. Those are not national team on a daily basis.
Even Men in Blazers, which I think would be the one mainstream equivalent at the soccer side.
But even Men in Blazers, talking about a very slim listenership, viewership than a Dan Patrick, Colin Cowherd, or Mancow, those big three names. So that's what I mean, is until they start talking about, maybe not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis even, maybe then we'll get the support or the outcry that you do have in the bubble.
Yeah, and look, that's not going to come anytime soon. Now, the other side of that, too, is the suggestion, to go back to his lead about the U8 player demanding her participation trophy and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, this is what frustrates me in that, is that there's this inference to that the fact that we're de-emphasizing competition at the youth ages across the board, and that's not just in the United States. It's pretty much a central platform of what's happening here in Canada as well. And you always get these people that yell at the moon about how we're softening our kids and how we're, everything has to be bubble wrapped and all that sort of stuff. They completely miss the point of long-term player development. And to me, his lead and the approach that he took sort of did another little undermining of those kind of approaches, which are sports scientifically proven to be effective, to be the right approach. I read an article this morning, just literally this morning, about rugby, but it talked about how if you delay identifying your elite stream from 13 to 16, just those 3 years, the difference in success rates in converting those elite athletes that you've identified into full-time adult elite athletes went from 1 and 4 to 3 and 4, just those 3 years. And that's a very simple sort of study right there that I just happened to read this morning. There's tons more out there that sort of underline that idea that delaying true elite competitiveness, like hyper competitiveness from the younger ages up, makes a lot of sense on an LTPD level, and certainly anything that undermines that's going to get my back up, and that's where my defensiveness came here. But that's final thought on that. And this is something, again, like this show, I could have gone 3 hours today on this show, but is the U.S. mediocre? This is the other question. Is, in fact, their performance, I think certainly in this cycle, but over the last 20 years, have they been mediocre? Have they underperformed?
No.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that.
I would say hands down no. They came out of the group stage a few times in the World Cup. They reached quarterfinals. You're talking about a team that rivaled Mexico as the best team in CONCACAF Mexico, which is a top 10, top 20 powerhouse in the world of soccer internationally. You're not talking about a team that has actually probably overperformed in the last 20 years. It is not now, and that's why, or that's maybe the reasoning behind the outcry about Klinsmann. So no, I think it has performed well that it should be, and it is not mediocre. Is it Argentina producing Messi? No, but even Argentina does produce 11 Messis. There's one, so we need to stop that comparison too.
Yeah, look, and there's a couple other things. We'll go a couple minutes over here. There's a couple other things about that too. You have to have, if you have a long view of where U.S. soccer was just even 25 years ago to today, I mean, it starts to be absurd to think that they're underperforming, because what they've done, going to a quarterfinals, consistently advancing into the group stage of the World Cup, being at every World Cup since 1994, qualifying for every World Cup since 1998, all of those things, since 1990, pardon me, they qualified in 1990. All of those things were absurd. In 1988, which Kevin's not old enough to remember. I am old enough to remember it, not to great detail, but enough that I can remember sort of where the U.S. was back then. It was absurd to think that they would do those things. And it all stems from the growth that started from that 94 World Cup berth. And a big part of that, of course, was the creation of Major League Soccer. And then a big issue that I have right now with the constant bashing of Major League Soccer by certain elements of the fandom out there is that it seems to me that they're new. And they're failing to see what MLS has done for the soccer pyramid in the United States, and are only focusing on a very narrow and hyper-focused perception that they have about the model that Major League Soccer operates in. Yes, it's time to take the training wheels off a little quicker than is what is happening in that system, but to ignore the positives that MLS have brought to American soccer, to ignore the amount of growth that has happened in American soccer in the last 25 years, is to have an agenda that isn't always necessarily with the U.S.'s best interest in mind. And I'm saying this as an outsider to the American system, Kevin. But the American system has a great deal of interest to me, and because it mirrors the one that I work in and one that I live in, which is why these issues matter to me as well. Any final thoughts on this, Kevin, before we move past it?
No, I think we agree on this one, that it's not mediocre, and we do need. It doesn't mean it's not because it's not mediocre that it shouldn't be accountable.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some bits and bites to end the show.
The bits and bites on Soccer Today.
All right.
St. Clair of Cheetahs, available on Google, iTunes, anywhere you want.
Exactly. I like them on Spotify. They came up with my Spotify mix just yesterday, guys. It was EastEnders, which is my favorite song of theirs. All right. I guess the biggest news yesterday of the last couple of days is this sort of the quitting or the moving on of several big names in Major League Soccer.
Do we call it the LA hiatus, the mass exodus, or
yes.
How do you call it?
Steven Gerrard. Gerrard, of course, he's we don't have this on the platform or on the lineup today, but he's been linked to MK Dons, which is just an absolute bizarre
as a coach situation, kind of
as a manager. Yeah, like to come in as their vacant manager, which is I think MK Dons is it's franchise FC, right?
One.
So
yeah,
they struggled to get relevance. So to bring in a legend like Steven Gerrard, then maybe they're thinking they might get some relevance out of that. I'm sure is part of the thinking there. But moving past him for a second, though, if that happens, we'll deal with that a little bit more. Frank Lampard announces he's leaving NYC FC. We all assume he's either going back to Chelsea in some capacity or going to do like Michael Owen and raise horses or something. Like we think he's retiring. However, it comes out that he wants to keep playing. And in fact, he wants to keep playing in Major League Soccer, which is like, what the hell? Okay.
What?
Yeah. All right. So putting that aside for a second, then we get Robbie Keane the other day, and we go, "Oh, Robbie Keane, thank you." We see the tweets are going out. All right, he must have retired. Nope, he wants to keep playing in Major League Soccer too.
Just not in LA.
Just not in LA. So LA is obvious. So there's obviously something going on with LA that they're going to build around Gio, is what I think is happening with LA. That they're keeping Gio. They're going to try and build a team around his strengths, which is something that a lot of people have been calling for a while. Bring in a few younger players. Maybe they even move on from Bruce Arena, because I think Arena maybe not the right person to lead a team of young players. We'll see. There's other people that might disagree with me on that, but we'll see. So obviously there's changes at front there. So, but this idea that he's going to keep playing in Major League Soccer, this is the next evolution, I guess, of the DPs. The idea that these big name DPs would actually play for a second Major League Soccer team, that they wouldn't just retire at the end of their journey here. Like, could you imagine David Beckham announcing, I'm going to done with the Galaxy, but I think I'm going to go play for the Columbus Crew now? Like, it's not something you can imagine, right?
Oh, we're always chirping on Columbus because for some reason it represents, like, no offense here, but like small market team.
Yeah, I don't know. You go to RSL maybe too. You can say, right? Or
you mentioned that with Robbie Keane, and you have that picture that you mentioned the Whitecaps posted a photo of Keane and Robo when they were both 25. If I'm thinking of the worst place Robbie Keane to go play with the state of his knees and health, would be Vancouver, and maybe that's going to happen. So that's it's a type of player that we've been saying Vancouver needs to go get, but not necessarily at this state of his career or his form / fitness, because he had injury leg problems, and the worst place in the league to play at home with that reasoning, if on that bad turf, would be BC Place.
Yeah, I have thoughts about that. First off, the photo that they posted, like, Robbo looks like 12 in it. It's insane. But at any rate, beyond that, though, to me, Robbie, it makes sense. As soon as I saw that and heard that rumor, I went, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense for the way the Whitecaps think. I think at this point in Robbie Keane's career, when he was born in 1980, for God's sakes, I wish he was born just a few months earlier so we could still have a 70s player in the league. That would be fun. But at any rate, basically, I guess we do with Pirlo. Anyway, I'm completely losing track today. It's Friday, you can tell.
Yeah.
Robbie Keane isn't a DP anymore, I don't think, at this age. He's probably a TAM player. And the Whitecaps are notorious for being cheap when it comes to DPs. We've talked about this to death, right, over the past few months. So it's perfect for them. They bring in Robbie Keane, who has the name of one of those big name DPs, but isn't going to cost them the same amount of money. And they get the best of both worlds in their mind. So if you're okay with that, signing a 37-year-old forward to play on turf where he might not be able to play a full season, then, hey, knock yourself off. A quick look at his stats this year shows that in 2016 for the Galaxy, Robbie Keane only played the 17 games. He has retired from international play now, so that certainly will maybe help him. He did score 10 goals, but if you look at his production over the past few years, you go 16, 19, 20, 10. There was a considerable drop, and even when you consider the differences in loss of games played, there was a significant drop in form there. He had about half the amount of shots. He was on pace, if he played the same amount of games as he did the years before, to probably score like 12, 13 goals, but that was still, it's just decent production, but still not quite up to the elite DP level that you would expect of a guy like that. You factor in the fact that he's increasingly getting older, and it becomes difficult to justify putting him on a true DP salary, but on a TAM salary, as your marquee player and using as sort of a diffusion to have people ignore the fact that you haven't really signed another person like that. I don't know, Kevin. It seems like an easy way out to the Whitecaps for me. We'll let Whitecaps fans make that decision, though. They'll decide whether they like this signing or not. Your thoughts?
No, I have to agree with you. It would make sense too with the Keane and Robbo connection there. It's Fox Julie Stewart Binks who actually reported this, by the way. So it'll be interesting to see because even Minnesota could be a situation where Robbie Keane is interested in. But we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, Robbie Keane is a very look. We've called him the best DP in league history, and I stand by that because of his longevity and his consistent performance over multiple years. So it's not that I think that it's impossible that he couldn't be successful in another market. So let's put that out there quickly. I just think that from an operations standpoint, it might signal certain things about the Whitecaps that maybe aren't necessarily the way you'd want them to be. He's also a player, however, that has a reputation for needing to be the number one and the main focus. So if you're bringing Robbie Keane in, you have to understand that you're bringing Robbie Keane in to be your number one striker, and you want to do that for a guy his age. I don't think he's a guy that's going to come in with a bench role. I don't think he's a guy that's going to come in on a secondary role. He's going to want to be the man, and if you think he's still got a couple more years, then sure, why not? I can see the logic in Minnesota as a significant name that they can afford. If in fact they do feel that they can't afford the big name DPs, then that would, for the same reasons I just spoke to about Vancouver, would sort of be an in-between move that they could make. It still gives them the name at a lesser hit.
Yeah.
So there's that, all that going on. So we'll see. It's interesting. Lampard's the other side of it too, and he's being linked with Orlando. Which is interesting because Jason Kreis is there. So I guess obviously Kreis would have worked closely with Lampard during his year in Manchester, where both would have been there at the same time. That's probably the most productive time both spent in the NYCFC system.
Yeah.
And also he's being linked to, drum roll, the LA Galaxy, which just makes me chuckle. At any rate, why not?
Yeah, why not? Gerard for Lampard. I don't know. Feels like international England type of feel there. Other things I wanted to add to the bits and bytes when that it's before you talk about the CPL, it's maybe CPL related. Mathieu Lapointe on Twitter asked us if we think there's any correlation between the Bois-le-Boulogne, that's where the Fédération Soccer du Québec is located in Laval, is doing some renovation to the field adjacent or close by, and kind of a stadium. Do you think there's going to be any link to that, to a potential future CPL team? My gut feeling on this is there's many different viable options for a soccer team in Laval. Talk maybe a PLSQ level, maybe CPL level, maybe the future home of FC Montreal in another league they're playing, maybe in Laval. There's a lot of possibilities with that renovation, with those facilities in Laval at Bois-le-Boulogne. So that's interesting. That's where I would see it as maybe PLSQ, maybe the future home of the FC Montreal, who knows, or maybe just a CPL team. But the CPL, for me, the size of the stadium would be a concern for the CPL. I would probably imagine it's probably more PLSQ because of if you're looking at the Vaughan situation, Vaughan Azzurri, I think it would be the similar situation for Laval in a future PLSQ team run by maybe the Fédération Soccer du Québec or something close to it.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on the Canadian Premier League in Quebec, and it remains, I think, a challenge for them right now to find an appropriate owner and market in Quebec. I have heard Laval as a possibility as a market that's a little outside Montreal, very little bit outside Montreal. It's not. It's
you even
really
have the Metro going to Laval now, so that's you're actually hearing me right now from Laval. If you didn't know, so
yeah, the Laval comment himself, Kevin.
Exactly. Oh, the Laval comments, we miss you.
There you go. No, so I have heard that market. I have also heard it suggested to me that of the three MLS teams, and we have, there's conflicting ideas and thoughts about the involvement in the Major League Soccer teams within the Canadian Premier League. However, I have heard it's stated to me that the team least likely to be involved are the Impact, that Saputos don't have a lot of interest in the league, that they are very protective of their market, basically, and they kind of don't like the idea of competition coming in is sort of what I'm getting out of that. So if there is to be a Quebec team, and I believe it's very important that there should be, at least in the second year, if not off launch, then they're going to have to find a secondary owner there. And I don't know. I think, to me, it continues to make the most sense that you're going to find that secondary ownership in Quebec City, not in Montreal. I don't know. Your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, no, and Quebec City is known to be in the soccer town, especially at the development level, the Royal Beauport and that pyramid. So, no, it would make sense. I still mention that for me, the Royal Beauport should become the CPL team, and then makes a lot of sense in all different ways, I think.
Yeah, I like the idea of Quebec City having a Canadian Premier League team, because then, you extrapolate that to a Voyageurs Cup situation and think about the possibility of the occasional Quebec-Montreal game.
That would be a true derby.
Yeah, the possibility of that. We haven't had those two cities really competing on equal footing in many sports since the Nordique left, right? So it would be, I think, a lot of fun. I guess the university football would be the other area that they compete, but
that's the only, basically, the direct competition between the two cities is Université Montréal versus Roger and Université Laval. And you have seen in the Dunsmore Cup a few weeks ago, Laval beat Montreal first time in 3 years, and it was celebrated big time by the big Laval contingent that then traveled to Montreal because, well, it's the only direct competition in the highest level of sport between the two cities right now.
Yeah, I once asked a guy that I knew that was a Laval fan. I knew him through Laval. I used to cover CIS football, for those who don't know. I asked him about the Habs, and because he was a Nordiques fan, a huge Nordiques fan, and he said he basically spit when I asked him that question, and then said that he cheered for wherever Joe Sakic was doing, he'd cheer for. Other than that, he didn't have an NHL team anymore. So don't think that that Montreal-Quebec rivalry isn't pretty deep, because it is. All right,
It is.
All right, I do have something, and maybe I'll wait for next week on this. I put a poll out this week, just tease it right now, asking what you think the appropriate quota would be for the Canadian Premier League to start. And I gave several options of low one, 10%, 25%, 50%, 75%. And most people are coming in at 50%, to be honest, which I think is kind of, it makes sense. Most people would think that way. So it is an interesting thought exercise, and perhaps I'll play with this over the course of the weekend into next week to sort of look at what is realistic. And, as MLS winds down and as the CPL rumors continue to increase, I think we're going to spend more and more time sort of looking at what kind of structures make sense. So that's one that I encourage you to go to my Twitter feed, have a look at that poll. If you haven't voted, vote in and have the discussion, keep it going. It's something to do. Another thing I want to tease for next week is last night I caved and I bought FM 17, Football Manager 17. I'm going to have a full review of that probably later next week, earlier the week after. We'll see. We've got a lot to get to next week in terms of the MLS playoffs with both games going on and things like that. But certainly we will review FM 17 very soon. I've started in Portugal. We'll see how that goes. Kevin,
In Portugal?
Any final thoughts on the week?
Started in Portugal? Why would you do that?
Because I actually had dice. I rolled dice to pick a team randomly, and I ended up in Portugal.
Okay, what's your team this year? Okay.
For Alex Bunbury's former team.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they're one of the lower level team in the Premier League of Portugal. I've never played Portugal game before, so it'll be interesting too. That's one of the brilliant things I love about Football Manager is it teaches you about different leagues around the world. I mean, it's an educational tool that way. Like I learn about how the structures, how the cup competitions work, just what different teams are, what different clubs are. I've learned it's one of the greatest things about that league.
I learned my England geography because of FIFA. Because of the fourth year that's available in the league.
All right. Final thoughts on the week before we say goodbye.
Well, yes, tomorrow at 12:30, the Procure Kampfball Club Trollputzen tournament I will be part of. Come and be part of it. Donate. There's many teams going to be involved afterwards, but 12:30 at Soccer 5. And until Monday, next time for Soccer Today, well, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.